Hello, welcome back. Today we're celebrating the launch of my new design, the Daphne Henley Tank Top. As with all my other designs, Daphne is written in all 9 of the Craft Yarn Council sizes, from a 27-inch bust through to a 62-inch bust. I used the Lab Fibers Everyday Fingering Weight yarn in the colorway Urban to create mine. I kind of always wanted to do a Henley tank, and I had just enough yarn left over from my Laurel Henley sweater that I released in January to create a younger, cooler, summery sister for Laurel, Daphne. I told the story about the buttons on my Laurel sweater for my Instagram followers, but I'm going to tell you it here too. So I come from a family that is super, super crafty. You name the craft, someone in my family has done it or does do it. When my grandmother passed away, my mom got her sewing kit, and in that sewing kit there's all kinds of little goodies, but that's where I got these buttons and the buttons that I used for Laurel. I think it's pretty cool and pretty special to be able to incorporate something that she purchased for some project, who knows when, and get to incorporate that into one of my designs. I had some amazing testers for Laurel that took some fantastic photos that I'm going to share at the end of this video. I get a lot of questions about my design process, how I come up with these ideas, and how I go from idea to pattern launch. So I'm going to walk you through it just real briefly today. As I mentioned in last week's video, I often get my ideas from the fashion industry, from my own closet, from when I'm out shopping, from pictures that I see, from people that I see on the street wearing something that I want to make. That's generally where I get my ideas from. Once I have the idea, I go through as many sources as I can to make sure that this idea doesn't already exist. Creating unique pieces is a very important early step in the design process. We should never be getting inspiration from places like Ravelry. If you're a crochet designer, for example, you can't go and look at something knit and be like, I'm just going to make a crochet version of that. You need to have more elements that are different. So where do I check for uniqueness? The first place you check for anything, Google. Pretend you're going to buy the pattern for the idea that's in your head. What would you plunk into Google in order to try and find that pattern? So for example, with Daphne, crochet Henley tank top. Does anything come up? Pop over to the images tab, pop over to the shop tab. Is there anything in a reasonable amount of photos on Google? If not, carry on. The next place I like to check, Pinterest. Pinterest and Google share a lot of images, but sometimes Pinterest will have a little bit better SEO because it is more visual and crafty oriented. But follow the same process. Type in what you would search for if you were searching for your design idea. The third place I search like this is Etsy. A lot of designers sell their designs on Etsy, and it's also set up like a search engine similar to Google and Pinterest. Then, one of the most important and easiest spots to search is Ravelry. Ravelry is the most extensive database of knit and crochet patterns. And in there you can refine by certain design elements. So for this tank top, all I had to do was go in and just type in, I did all crafts because I don't think changing from knit to crochet is a big enough change for it to be considered unique. So for this tank top, when I'm checking for uniqueness on Ravelry, I put in sleeveless top and Henley neckline, just to start, see what's there. Very few results come up. If you see something that looks like what your design idea is, you have to then think of maybe 3 to 5 elements to change. And I'm not talking changing color here. That does not count. You need to change the ease, the stitch, the yarn weight, the craft, change more elements. Once you feel you've exhausted all of the search terms that you can on those search engines, then I think it's fair to proceed. Now, sometimes some things are going to come up. A designer comes out of the woodwork and your design looks a lot like theirs, or vice versa, and that needs to be dealt with. I think in these situations, it's important to stay very professional and not to assume the worst of each other. So if you're the designer who's making something that kind of looks like it already exists, you have two options. You can vouch for your design and explain why and how it's different than that other design, or you can choose to stop what you're doing and come up with a different design idea. At the end of the day, it all boils down to gut feeling and to our integrity as designers. Because copyright is very, very difficult to prove in our industry, we do have to just kind of lead with our respect and integrity. There are only so many stitches and stitch combinations and types of garments and hats and shawls and things that can be made. So there is going to be overlap in every single thing that we make. And as we continue to create more designs and more patterns in the knit and crochet world, that overlap is going to get more and more. It all boils down to having integrity in your creative process and respect in your conversations with other designers. Leading with integrity and respect in this community is what is going to make your design business flourish. I have a whole blog post on uniqueness and determining if your designs are unique enough to be considered something new and original. That link is in the caption. From there, I pitch to a yarn partner. So whether it be a big yarn company or an indie dyer, I say, here's what I want to make. Here's some kind of sample photos that I'll often just find on Google Images. Here are the stitches that I think I'd like to use, how much yarn I think I'd like to use, and when I expect to release the pattern. Indie dyers are my favorite to work with because they're other small businesses, and I love to be able to showcase other small businesses and work with other small businesses. It just feels like a much more personal part of the process. The next step was not a step I used to follow, but I definitely do it every single time now. It's making a gauge swatch to make sure that I like the stitch that I've chosen, to make sure that the stitches aren't too gappy or that the fabric isn't too dense, and then I block the swatch. I'll get more into blocking and swatching in future videos, but it's important to know that I record my pre-blocked gauge and my post-block gauge. The pre-block gauge is what I'm going to check to make sure I'm matching as I'm making the piece, but the post-block gauge is what I'm going to do to grade it, to make it for the different sizes. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So my next step is, based on my swatch, I then grade it for my size and my size only. Do I want a lot of ease in the bust? Do I want the armholes to be fitted or really low? Do I want waist shaping? I figure all of those things out before I even start stitching. Once I have all of those numbers, I start stitching. Now, the reason I only grade for my size before I make it is I often make edits on the fly. I'll see something as I'm making it that I don't really love, and I'll switch it up. I'll change the math a little bit. Then once my sample is done, I grade it for all of the other sizes, I write up the rough draft of the pattern, and I do a call for testers. Another video I have planned coming up is to talk all about pattern testing, what it is, why we do it, who does it, how to do it. All of those things are coming your way. Fast forward through the testing phase. Now it's just time to make my final edits, make sure I've got great photos, make the listings for my website, email blast, all of that fun stuff that comes to launching a pattern. And that's generally an overview of what my design process looks like. All right, answering some of your questions from my Instagram stories. How do I decide what stitches to use for my designs? For the most part, the answer to this is I just stick to one of the basic stitches: double crochet, half double crochet, single crochet, extended single crochet. It's way easier to grade the simple stitches than it is to grade lace or textured stitches or some kind of stitch pattern repeating. So for new designers, I recommend just sticking with the basics. Find other elements of your design to make unique instead of the stitches. Keep it simple. The next question was about how I decide how much ease to put into my designs. And the answer to that is it depends on each design. For the most part, I like to keep a little bit of positive ease in my designs. So generally speaking, my designs will have anywhere from like 1 to 6 inches of positive ease. I just think that I like my clothes a little bit more loose and than fitted, and crochet creates such a dense fabric that I don't really love that being like tight up against my skin. All right, next question was, how do I come up with the names for my designs? Originally, they were all named after people who helped me out in my business in the early days. From there, it kind of went out to like friends and family. I started naming things after them. Sometimes it is still named after friends or family. Sometimes it's just random. I don't remember how I named Laurel, the big sister to Daphne, but then Daphne came to me because I looked up other names of other laurel trees, and one of them was called a Daphne laurel or something like that. So that's how Daphne got her name. They're all different though. It just depends on the design. Next question was how I came up with the template that I use for my designs, and the answer is I hired a graphic designer. I am not so great with graphic design or like making things look good and aesthetic, so I hired a graphic designer. My original template looked very similar to the one that I use now, but it was portrait style, and I just didn't love how that read on different devices. So I got him to create a new template for me, similar but with a different set of colors and landscape orientation. 3 things I wish I knew when I started designing. Well, first would be keep it simple. Keep it simple. Simple stitches, simple construction. You don't need to start with like a fingering weight lace dress. If you want to, by all means, go for it. But starting with like a nice simple double crochet yoke sweater or even panel style sweater that you seam together will be a lot easier for you. The second thing that I would say I wish I knew, or that I would recommend to people who want to get into designing, is to just go for it. Don't be afraid, jump in with both feet. Then the third thing would be not being so afraid of lightweight yarns. Once I started making things with DK and fingering weight yarn, there was no going back. I definitely recommend them for garments. They feel a lot better on your body. They do take a fair bit more time, but they're no more difficult to grade for different sizes than the heavier weight yarns. Now, enough about that. It's time to show you all of the amazing tester photos of the Daphne tank. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And we'll see you back here next week to learn all about pattern testing.